Hello, good afternoon, everybody. We have had some introductions on Safe by Design already. What does Safe by Design mean? Kjeld has given the framework and also explained that there are different levels at which you can do risk assessments. Now we go back to Stoffenmanager Nano, which is a first-tier risk banding tool. The good thing about this tool is that it can either be used on imaginary situations. So if you have an idea and you're in the scoping phase, you can use Stoffenmanager Nano to get an idea of the potential health risks, try to reduce those risks in the design, and then if you put it on the market, you'll see that the risks are not completely controlled, and then Stoffenmanager Nano again can be used to map the residual risks and see whatever control you can consider to control this afterwards. So this is a short introduction on how Stoffenmanager Nano relates to Safe by Design. Claire, can you give me the next slide? Well, first of all, Stoffenmanager Nano is a freely available IT tool that can be used for the prioritization of nano-specific health risks in occupational settings, so it's only for worker exposure. It gives you a qualitative assessment of inhalation exposure and related health risks. It can be used for all types of nanomaterials and all processes where nanomaterials are used in. Stoffenmanager Nano may assist producers, formulators, as well as end users, and makes use of the model hazard times exposure gives you the risk. In principle, everybody can use the tool, although I must say that knowledge of processes in a company, of course, will help, and understanding of risk assessment will also facilitate you in using the tool in the appropriate way. Cosanta is the company that hosts and owns Stoffenmanager Nano at the moment. Cosanta is a spin-off company of TNO, and you can find Stoffenmanager Nano at the website stoffenmanager.nl, and then you have to go to the Nano module. Next slide, please, Claire. If you go to the website, this is what the website looks like. This is Stoffenmanager version 7. Stoffenmanager is not for nanomaterials, it's for conventional chemical substances, let's say. But you can see next to the red box, Stoffenmanager, the Nano module. And if you click on that, Claire, please, you get to the next web page, and this is the Stoffenmanager Nano. And as you can see here, it's the Stoffenmanager Nano version 1, while the Stoffenmanager for generic substances is already version 7. So, well, we are considering updates, but for the moment, I have to explain to you what Stoffenmanager Nano version 1 does. Next slide, please, Claire. Well, how it works, as said, it makes use of the algorithm hazard times exposure gives you the risk. So Stoffenmanager Nano starts with a hazard assessment. If we go from left to right through the schedule, first you'll be asked whether the material is a nanomaterial or a non-nanomaterial. Of course, there are criteria for it, but the Stoffenmanager helps you to decide whether it's a nanomaterial or not. Then the next question is whether it's a soluble or insoluble nanomaterial. Only the insoluble nanomaterials go to this classification as depicted here in this slide. For the insoluble nanomaterials, it's asked whether it's a persistent fiber. If it is, you immediately go to hazard band E, which means the most severe hazard band. If it's not a persistent fiber, it's the other nanomaterials. Based on classification and labeling, you'll be facilitated in assigning the appropriate hazard band. But as we all know, for most nanomaterials, classification and labeling is lacking. Dus in most cases, you'll end up in the box unknown. Can we go to the next slide, Claire? This is the box unknown. So what's happening to the unknown nanomaterials? Stoffenmanager Nano contains a list of widely used nanomaterials. And based on expert judgment and data for the nanomaterials as well as mother material, hazard bands are pre-assigned to these nanomaterials. Then you'll be questioned whether you have a small or large nanomaterial, threshold 50 nanometers, and depending on that answer, you go to the hazard band C, D, or E. If it's not included in the list, the only question that you get is whether the parent material is classified for carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic, or sensibilization. If it is, the nanomaterial ends up in E, the most stringent hazard class, and if not, it ends up in D. So from this picture, you see that because in most cases, classification and labeling is not known, by using Stoffenmanager Nano version 1, you'll end up most likely in hazard band C, D, or E. Can we go to the next slide, please, Claire? So, what about exposure assessment? Stoffenmanager Nano makes use of 4 different source domains. So the first domain is fugitive emission from synthesis processes. The second domain is handling of nanopowders, so pure nanopowders. The third one is, well, actually products containing nanopowders, may either be liquid or solid products, but only part of the product is nanomaterials. And then the fourth domain is nanoparticles coming from abrasive activities on solid objects that contain nanomaterials. So the difference between the source domains is the appearance of the nanomaterials that you may be exposed to. Next slide, please. To assess the exposure, a model is used, which is called a source receptor model. As you can imagine, there is a source emitting nanomaterials. The level of emission is depending on the product that you use, on the nano product that you use, but also the activity that you perform with it. So there is a certain emission. This emission is transmitted to a receptor, for instance, a worker. But this transmission may be controlled by local ventilation or by generic ventilation, or maybe there are even other control measures in between. So only part of the emission will actually reach the worker. So this is the phase of emission, and also the emission where the nanoparticles reach the worker can be controlled by personal enclosure, for instance, or personal protective equipment. So this is put in an algorithm, and for each of the parameters, the user of Stoffenmanager Nano needs to quantify these parameters. This can be done by choosing the appropriate category from the parameters, and each category is related to a multiplier, in the end bringing you to exposure bands. There are 4 exposure bands possible. So next slide, please, Claire. So we have derived a hazard band for the nanomaterial or the nano product that we use. We have an exposure band for the activity that we do with it under the conditions that we use this material. And from this prioritization matrix, let's say, you can read which activities, which scenarios will get the highest prioritization for control. So the red boxes mean the highest prioritization, which is quite logic because it has the highest hazard classes combined with the highest exposure classes. So what we saw from Stoffenmanager version 1 is that you most likely end up in C, D, or E, in the hazard bands C, D, or E. And from this matrix, you can see that many of them are prioritized for control. So at the moment, we think that the discriminating power of Stoffenmanager version 1 is not that high. Of course, if you do have classification and labeling, it's pretty much okay. Next slide, please. So what will be the benefit to the user of using Stoffenmanager Nano? Well, it provides insight in a relative inhalation health risk caused by the nanomaterials. It can be used retrospective to find out where controls are needed and in which priority. So retrospective, I mean for situations that are already in place. But it can also be used prospective to identify likely health risks of new innovations that are not in place yet. Well, this is something something that is embraced in the LICARA NanoScan that I will present after this one. For Safe by Design, prospective use can help to identify possible risks and control them in the design phase, while the retrospective use can help to control the residual risks if there are any leftovers. Next slide, please, Claire. So what are the future plans? Well, of course, new version of Stoffenmanager Nano. We think that the data are not good enough yet to use Stoffenmanager Nano version 1 appropriately. The discriminating power is too little. So what we are going to do is integrate Stoffenmanager Nano completely in Stoffenmanager. So Stoffenmanager is version 7, Stoffenmanager Nano is version 1. Stoffenmanager has much more functionalities that are useful for industry. And with a complete integration, Stoffenmanager Nano also will contain these functionalities. Moreover, we're going to try to quantify the exposure assessment, and if we can, then inclusion of occupational exposure levels, or for the Netherlands, the temporarily nano reference values, would be a good way forward to do a more quantitative risk assessment. So it's very difficult to tell in 10 minutes exactly what Stoffenmanager Nano is like. I gave it a try, but I can imagine there are much more questions on this. So I'm delighted that I can offer you a free training on how to use Stoffenmanager Nano and also how to upgrade Stoffenmanager Nano in future as part of the Calibrate project. If you're interested, please email Ties and we'll elaborate further